Welcome back to the Dream Together podcast. My name is Clarence Hill. I'm with Lee Rowland, John Mark Hart, and Scotia Moore, our friends, our Dream Together family. We want to welcome you. Thanks for joining us. I hope you've been spreading the word about this conversation. And if this is your first time joining with us, we want to invite you to listen to the other podcasts because today's conversation is a little bit heavier. We're going to jump into probably the most painful piece of the letter, where Dr. King invites us into the conversation of why he felt like they needed to act immediately. But then I want you to hold on because, man, the way he lands this conversation and the things that he brings out, they are practical, they're applicable, there are things that can affect our personal lives, and they can impact the way we lead our cities and nation. So it's time right now to jump into the podcast. Thanks for joining us. This is the 60th anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. writing the letter from a Birmingham jail. And here in episode 4, we want to read probably one of the hardest portions of this letter that we could choose at this time. And the reason we're inviting all of us to listen to this part of this letter is because we want to practice that moment of sharing pain. We also want to let you know that we're reminding you that it's the 60th anniversary because this was written 60 years ago. There is a clear conversation for us to have around the idea of, hey, how far have we made it in this conversation since he wrote this letter? We can all say that we've made progress, and we can also say that there's a huge disagreement around the fact of answering the question of how far have we made it. So let's read this first portion here, and we're going to take some time to dialogue and talk about it. So join with me here. Dr. King says, "We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have yet to engage in a direct action campaign that was quote unquote well-timed in the view of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. We must come to see with one of our distinguished jurists that justice too long delayed is justice denied. We have waited for more than 340 years for our constitutional and God-given rights. The nations of Asia and Africa are moving with jet-like speed toward gaining political independence, but we still creep at horse and buggy pace toward gaining a cup of coffee at a lunch counter. Perhaps it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say, wait. But when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will and drown your sisters and brothers at whim, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, and even kill your Black brothers and sisters, when you see the vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on television, and see tears welling up in her eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to colored children, and see ominous clouds of inferiority beginning to form in her little mental sky, and see her beginning to distort her personality by developing an unconscious bitterness toward white people. When you have to concoct an answer for a 5-year-old son who is asking, Daddy, why do white people treat colored people so mean? When you take a cross-county drive and find it necessary to sleep night after night in the uncomfortable corners of your automobile because no motel will accept you. When you are humiliated day in and day out by nagging signs reading white and colored. When your first name becomes the N-word, your middle name becomes boy, however old you are, and your last name becomes John, and your wife and mother are never given the respected title Miss. When you are harried by day and haunted by night by the fact that you are a Negro, living constantly at tiptoe stance, never quite knowing what to expect next, and are plagued with inner fears and outer resentments, when you are forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we found it difficult to wait. There comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over, and men are no longer willing to be plunged into the abyss of despair. I hope, sirs, you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience. There's a lot there.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot there. You know, Dr. King is describing his impatience and the need for them to act now. And, you know, this is not just a moment to kind of look at the history here, but kind of even to enter into the pain of that moment. There's so much to value there. I can tell you, even as a parent, I want my children to be able to look into history and recognize, wow, someone saw pain in their generation, and they had to figure out, how are we going to steward this? Are we going to stay where we are? Are we going to have to find language, find words, find a correct posture? I even go back to that book of Esther. You know, for those of you that have never read the story of Esther, but it was actual a story about a serious racial issue. The only reason they got threatened with genocide was because one man named Mordecai, he decided that he was not going to bow when an official was coming by that hated them. And his one act that you could call an act of dignity in some people's eyes, some would call it an act of rebellion in other people's eyes, but Mordecai's like, I'm not bowing down. This was one person who looked at his circumstance and said, I can't tolerate this and I need to know how to do something. There's so much we can learn from this. Let's just start at, you know, what do you hear when you listen to him describe the pain of what he had to communicate to his children and his reasons for saying, we can't wait?
I can only imagine the difficulty in sharing your pain with your children. My mom and dad, grew up in the 60s and 70s. And my mom and dad just didn't share a lot of that stuff and whatnot. But he's the leader of this movement. And so I just saw the weeping at church. I saw the energy at church that was really, I was kind of protected from at home. And so when I hear him sharing, man, the difficulty of looking into your child's eye and not being able to explain this. Some of you all have young children, and there's some things you're like, hey, I don't know how to do this. And I remember watching some painful events on television, and my grandson, who is 5 now, was 2.5, and he was asking, why are all of those people right there? What's going on? And this was with some of the unrest here in the country. And I'm trying to articulate to someone that I want to experience innocence as long as he can. I'm okay with him believing in Santa Claus at 2.5. And I know some people aren't, but I just want him to have just total innocence and fun. And so the thought of thinking about trying to articulate such a difficult thing to children, to say why other people don't like you, and you don't want that child to have hate, you don't want that child to have fear, and you don't want that child really angry. I am a great empathizer, and I empathize with young Martin there that was trying to express that to his kids.
That's a really good point. You know, you directed my attention back to him almost being called forward. So a commercial comes on about Funtown. And so you're doing all this work to protect your children from a pain that they're going to have to face one day.
Right.
And you're doing a pretty good job of it. You know, you go out the door and you know you're not getting a promotion. You know that there's maybe a lid on what you can do in society, and that tomorrow that you're dreaming of is kind of out of reach. You might not get to taste it. So you create this space, this place for your children to not have to face that sting. And I can imagine at that time, honestly, the Black communities were stronger, more connected, I think, even than today.
I agree.
And so you find a bubble, a safe space, and the Black church was that space in a lot of ways for some families. But then comes a commercial, and all of the safe space that you were working on, and you sit there, you can't change the channel. And of course, I don't think they have remote control. You can't change the channel, and all of a sudden, Junior's watching Funtown. And you know how wide-eyed kids get. Can we go to Funtown? Can we go to Funtown? Can we go to Funtown? Now you got to find the words to communicate to your child. There's a world in front of you. We're working on it. But there's a world in front of you that needs some change. I think it's healthy as a parent to protect our children from some of the pains of this world. But boy, there's a crossover point when you have to say, let's get you ready for the, what was it, the real thing, baby? Let's get you ready. And I think I mentioned this before, but one of the small ways that we've done that is, let's just take one pain point. Depression and suicide in our schools, it's real. That a kid could be here one day and gone the next, and literally, why in the world is a child under age 13 even thinking about taking their life? I mean, what in the world is going on? But to say, okay, son, daughter, you're used to safe spaces, but now what if you start thinking on how to go to the playground, go to the cafeteria? I want you to be trained to look for those who feel rejected.
Yeah.
I think what you're saying about parenting, I mean, this is just, for anybody with kids, this is so relatable. And it makes me ache to hear that. Every time I read that, it just hurts. 60 years later, I'm a white guy, but there's something deeply human there that I connect with. And part of what Dr. King is doing as a brilliant man, an internationally known leader, a strong man, is he's being vulnerable.
Yeah.
I mean, that word vulnerable comes from the Latin word for a wound. He's saying, here's a wound that I have that isn't healed yet. It's an open wound. And that is hard to do. That takes courage, but it's shifting a conversation because he's responding to people who are accusing him of impatience. We would solve this problem in a few decades more peaceably than you're trying to make us solve it right now. And he's done several things. He's shifted this from a conversation about political issues to a conversation about human pain.
Yeah.
And another thing that he's done is drawn our attention to just thinking about this word patience. I mean, we say in our culture, patience is a virtue. Patience is a virtue. And it is, depending on what you mean by it. But Thomas Aquinas said it's never virtuous to be patient in the face of another person's suffering.
Yep.
And so,
good.
And so he's saying to us here, if we wait a few decades to bring change in a way that feels like less upheaval to you, my critics, then my kids are going to be raising their kids in a world where they don't go to Funtown.
Yep.
And he talked about the clouds of inferiority and his kids' hearts.
Yep.
He don't want to have to wait for his great-grandkids to not have to deal with that. He talks about his kids having their personalities distorted. He doesn't want them to have hate, you know? So it just is something that for us today, as we face divisive political issues, to sometimes just shift and say, what is the human pain here? And instead of blame game and policy debates, saying, hey, what is the point of pain and how can we love these people and be solution oriented, to say, I'm not going to be impatient. I'm not going to be patient with the unnecessary suffering of my neighbor.
Yeah. And that argument really doesn't work around any other intimate relationship, or like, I'm good, so aren't you good? So it's good. Or, it's not pain because I'm not hurting. So, that doesn't work in creating trust and honor and mutuality and in relationships. And so in our close relationships, and it certainly doesn't in our further out relationships with our neighbors who we know and don't know. When I look at that, the section that you mentioned, those clouds of inferiority coming in, that to me as a parent, having gotten to grow up without that creeping in, because I've shared before, just my background is having been raised in this very temporary but very sweet bubble of just like support and like, you can be anything you want to be and you can da-da-da-da. So I didn't grow up with like thinking I couldn't accomplish something because of, being Black or being a woman or whatever, because I just saw some amazing pioneers around me who were doing amazing things and speaking that into me. But then as a parent, because I know that there are some people who are listening to this and they're hearing us talk about, this is the 60-year anniversary of this letter. And so, they may be the way that I was, thinking, okay, that was 60 years ago. Right. It's not today. Right. And I've had conversations within the last couple of weeks with people who have said, I thought that we had moved beyond this. And so I am always like willing to be the first one to be vulnerable, because somebody has to break the ice so everyone else can have courage to do so. But I mean, in the last year, my elementary school child has been called the N-word, and not in a derogatory, accusing way by another child who does not look like him. And so he had accidentally stepped on his paper in chapel, in school's chapel service. And the paper was on the floor and he didn't see it and he stepped on it. And the child just dug down to pull out the most defaming verbal violence that he could commit against my son. And that's what came out of his mouth. And so, along with some other adjectives to that. And so being like today, we're having to walk our children through some of these things. Today, we're having to try to dispel the clouds of inferiority. And so it's still an issue today. And so we can't just relegate it to a problem of the past. We're still, there's like this generational carryover that continues until love has broken through and caused all of that to seep out. So we're still doing the work. Right. But in the meanwhile, there's still new and fresh opportunities to be vulnerable, because there are new and fresh wounds that happen. And that's just the reality.
To just piggyback on what you were saying, Scotia, I think as we dream together of a brighter future, we're trying to go, lament leading to hope.
Yes.
We do have to talk about, okay, so what are the things that are broken right now? And sometimes we can get derailed. I mean, the question, how much progress have we made, is a valid question. The question, where do we see injustice, is a valid question. Although sometimes we know that then people start arguing. Is that injustice? What's going on here? But sometimes just asking the question, where are the places of deep pain?
Yeah. Where
are the places of deep pain? And then instead of playing a blame game, just saying, how can we as a community try to address those? And you just named some, but I would just say, like on a big level, the neighborhood, the part of our city where my church is doing ministry, we could just start naming a lot of things. Yep. There's widespread drug addiction. There's those issues. There's issues of just the lifespan, and those zip codes is about 16 years shorter than the lifespan of some zip codes a few miles north, because of a variety of reasons. We could talk about the school systems. The school system is still color-coded, and it's still very much unequal. We can argue about causes, but that's a point of pain.
Yeah.
And that's a point of pain that my family faces and that the families in my neighborhood face every day. Kids in those 16 schools, over 90% of them are going to be reading below grade level during their middle elementary years. And we know statistically that means their likelihood of dropping out of school and ended up in our overcrowded prisons. Oh, by the way, our prisons are overcrowded. We've got a very high incarceration rate, especially for women, especially for people of color. These are places of pain. And the goal here is not to place blame. It's just to say there's thousands of our neighbors that are hurting.
Yeah.
And as our friend said to us in a conversation recently, it may not be your fault, but it is your responsibility. How can we as a community bring healing to those places of pain?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like addressing this conversation more as an invitation.
Yeah.
You know, because if we try to have this conversation on a podcast that's 30 to 50 minutes, there are too many explosive terms that make people veer off and they can't take it anymore.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
This injustice, there are no injustices. Get off of that because you're blaming others.
Mm-hmm.
The Dream Together conversation actually more for, it's an invitation for those who are saying, I see someone in pain and it's not okay with me.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's to even try to go down the road of accusing someone else of not caring. It's too hard to even measure that because one, you don't know what they're doing with their time anyway, even if they have a podcast or a position or they're a political leader and they're saying certain things, you still don't know what they do in their own world. The context is so divided. I think we get further down the road when we make room and we just kind of put out a flare and say, hey, is there anyone who simply cares that someone else is in pain and we can do something about it? Question number one. Number two, are you willing to consider that by, and this is a Leeism, by caring about solving their pain is actually going to solve the problems we all have, that we want to have safe, flourishing cities. Regardless of whose fault it is. Well, the parents should have stayed together. I'll give you an amen, of course they should have. Or why they, somebody sing, or listen to the music that they listen to. Right on. But explain that to a 7-year-old who's listening to her mother get slapped around and then they got to get off on the school bus and the cycle's going to repeat.
Right.
This is, to me, it's just like Jesus looking at man. That brokenness, heaven's opportunity. That brokenness is our opportunity. So we really want to set up this conversation even as we look at this pain 60 years ago to say that the invitation we're putting out to dream together, this is for those who do have difficulty driving past someone in pain. Now, you can say, hey, well, 90% of people homeless and unhoused, they're addicted. I think your stat, it may be true. I don't know the specific, but I don't know what it's like to wake up in a home without both of my parents. I don't know what it's like to open a refrigerator and there be no food. I don't know what it's like to get married, lose a marriage, fall into whatever was the tilting thing in life. I don't know that. But man, if I was in those cases, I would wish someone had a bridge out for me. That's who this conversation, that's what Strong Together and Dream Together is all about.
Yeah. And sometimes it's this tension, because this is heavy. I mean, we have to acknowledge this is really heavy. But sometimes it's that catalyzing moment of pain or offense that actually becomes the doorway to understanding, to growth, and to connection if we handle it right. So in that situation with my son, you know, that wasn't the end of it. There was a restorative process that took place so that those two young men could become friends on a level that they weren't before.
Ooh, that's great.
And so there is, you know, we have to be so careful not to throw people away when they make mistakes or when they don't do it right or when they are offensive or hurtful, because God knows I've been the one, you know,
That's so
like ask
good.
any of my children. I have not always said it the right way, or, you know, I've had to go back so many times and apologize so many times and be restored. And I was at the mercy of their forgiveness. So, you know, creating a pathway that says, yes, there are broken things, but that does not have to be the end of the conversation. That's the beginning of a deeper
so
one.
rich.
So, yeah.
That's so rich. So you're telling me that you all went through some kind of a process. And Lee, I want to share with you, I have all these Lee notes from areas where we walked together, but did you got the two boys together, talked to their parents?
The school did. The
Friendship.
school
You said
came
something
and
about
told
getting
us-
these two to be friends.
Yeah. And
Give us a little bit
because
more
I
of that.
really think that, I mean, what I understood from it was that young man was as shocked. Have you ever responded in a way that you shocked yourself? Like, oh man, I shouldn't have said that, or oh, I shouldn't have done that, or oh, I shouldn't have handled that, or oh, I shouldn't have
That's
sent
some
that
real
email,
honesty.
or oh, I shouldn't have posted that. You know, we've all done something that we would say is not representative of all of my character, but I got to be honest, it's representative of some. So let's deal with it, but also let's not say that's all of who someone is and throw them away.
Right.
And
Oh,
so in that
That's good.
process,
That's
those
so
boys were
good.
brought
Yes,
back
it is.
together to kind of walk through that. And that is the power of an education setting where there is freedom to walk through a restorative process where people can come to understand themselves better. I mean, that is education because that's learning and that's growth. And so they were allowed to walk through that and kind of share how that situation made them feel and what happened and work through it.
I just want to say Scotia Moore in 2024
Nah.
for president.
Absolutely not.
We need a peacemaker. I think we just need a mama, a peacemaker, maybe a husband and somebody that can just help us walk in unity.
Yeah.
So I take so many notes when I'm around these champions because they live in different spaces. So Lee, if I would have become a principal, I'm not a principal, I've never been a principal, but if I ever became a principal, I would have your notes in my back pocket. And you probably don't remember sharing this story with me, but you told me that if anybody wants to learn how to deal with boys getting in fights and become peacemakers, you said that the teachers need to get schooled by the coaches. And you walked me through a scenario of why you caused suspension rates to go down because you knew how to handle two people at odds. And I just think we don't have a lot of leaders right now that know how to handle left wing and right wing at odds and just quiet some things down. And so here's the note that I took. I'm like, I would not have known that. A young man will test you as a leader and probably be rebellious. So that incenses me when a young person, I'm still old school. That's still old school.
Try
to me.
having 6 teenagers at one time.
Oh my goodness.
Can I get a witness?
Let me tell you how bad it is for me. I was groomed in an old school world. So if a child calls me by my first name, I still twitch something. Okay, that's how bad I am. I just confession to everybody. I know a lot of people call me by my first name, but okay. Lee.
Tell your children to call him Mr. Hill.
A little subtle comment there. So Lee said when he has two boys that get in a fight, they usually don't end up in suspension. And you can fill in if I missed this, but you said you sit the two down, and you said you keep working and you don't make eye contact with the child. Because there's something about refusing them eye contact and you begin to talk to them while you stay busy and you won't look at them. And then soon, you wait for the boys to simmer down and you begin a conversation. And usually in 30 to 45 minutes, they're back in their classroom behaving. I mean, it's not just a cover up to get them out of suspension, but they really do grow from them. Lee, you gotta take us into that. Because if one of those kids walked in my office and was still swinging and mad at me, and if he turned that rebellion towards me, I'd have been helping the suspension rates go up.
Got you.
Help me. Help us, Lee, and share with us some of the actual wisdom you use to build bridges.
Well, I share in my book my greatest pain and my greatest joy is that is my greatest pain is I remember what it was like to be a child. And so I remember, I mean, every age, 4 or 5, I can tell stories that my family's like, you remember that? And my greatest, really part of my success is that I remember that, because then as I can remember, I can kind of like, okay, how do we execute, how do we respond to the issue here? And so one of the things I realized is that it was very, very uncomfortable looking at an adult when I'm in trouble. I remember that specifically.
Wow.
I was fearful of them. They had all the power. I had none.
That is true.
And so I didn't want to look at them. And so I had the power in my office. I had the power as the principal. And so I just wouldn't look at a kid. And I just started to talk to him about, okay, what he did. And sometimes I would share something that I did. And as I de-escalated that child's fear in me and started to see my humanity, that, hey, he's just a person just like me, I could see that child start to just calm down. And then we could start to look at each other in the eye and say, hey, man, I feel you. Now, let's look at how we kind of need to address this. We need to go back and apologize to this kid. And at that point, we can go eye to eye. At that point, we can really start to really communicate. Hey, you need to go back and say this to the teacher. You need, yeah. And a lot of times, I wouldn't even have to give them the solution. They would ask me, can I go do this? She's talking about her child. I've shared it with her in the community that we live in. My wife and I were walking 2 months ago, and a couple of teenagers called us the N-word. And I approached those young men. They ran, and I just wanted to talk to them. They ran into a bathroom at a facility that was nearby.
Were you holding something, swinging
I
something?
wasn't. They just saw, oh, this man, and he's calling us. And I went and employed the same thing. I didn't know where they went. They ran into this building, and I wanted to talk to them. And when they ran in there, I said, you guys come out right now. And just out of respect for this tone of voice, they came out of that room. And I said, do you realize the harm that you could have caused me when you said that? And they said, yes, sir. Yes, sir. I said, you have anything you want to say to me? I didn't look at him. I said, you have anything you want to say to me? I said, well, sorry, sir. I said, you guys are forgiven. I want you to know I'm a kid advocate if there ever was one. You made a mistake. Just don't repeat that, or else it's not a mistake. It's who you are. And I don't believe that's who you are.
Wow.
And I said, God bless you guys. They said, God bless you, sir. I turned around and walked out.
Lee, that last part of it, when you said, I don't believe that's who you are, that's so big.
Yep.
And as we're talking about pain, I know Clarence has a hopeful quote to read us before we finish it.
Yeah.
But here's the thing about pain. It can deform us or it can transform us.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so much of that is like, what's the story? This pain happened, but what's the bigger story that it's a part of? And a lot of us want to hide from pain because we've seen it deform. We've seen trauma, generational effects of trauma. We've seen it create anger, and we don't want to go there. And I just think that doesn't work. I mean, as we're talking about, I started talking about some pain points in my community. And here's the thing. I'm not talking about political landmine issues. I'm just talking about my friends.
Yeah.
I'm talking about our community, our neighborhood. And if that makes people feel uncomfortable and angry, say, hey, I'm sorry, I don't want you to feel uncomfortable and angry, but we're still here and we're still hurting. This is still happening. And we can't run away from it. But the fear is it's going to deform us. It's going to make us angry. It's going to traumatize us. But it's what's the story? And if the story is like, this is my destiny, this is who I am, this is who we are, this is who my people are, people who look like me are, then it tends to deform us. But if the story is a story of hope and redemption and healing and reconciliation, then that pain is an invitation to growth. So we want to put it within that bigger narrative so that pain, naming our pain, suffering together is going to be the step towards loving towards growing together, towards healing.
Yeah, so that's really good. I think so. The opportunity for us all is that if we have a posture towards someone else and we're telling them, well, your point is irrelevant or you need to wait, I think part of the invitation is to, do what we just did, to enter into the pain and hear a father like Martin Luther King Jr. talk about the world as the way he sees it. I wonder if the clergymen took the time to read this. I wonder if they were like, that King guy, I just wish he would do what he says. Sometimes when you're in a group, you're less likely to change unless the whole group is changing. And so you're like, man, no, I just wish he would be quiet, go back to Atlanta and go find a place to preach, blah, blah, blah. And I could just imagine them saying that, and then the Fun Time commercial comes on. I can imagine them saying that, and then they drive past Funtown, or they knew they were planning to go there for the summer, and they lift their eyes. And we've had this happen several times in our groups, where people just lift their eyes. And I remember Jesus telling them to lift your eyes, for the harvest is ripe. They were actually surrounded by Samaritans when they said this was the group that the Jews hated. And then sometimes it's just a moment, lift your eyes. Are you in a space where you could even understand someone's pain? And for some, the racial and ethnic conversation is too many landmines. But just think class. Think about someone who just doesn't have everything you have. The family or the relational support is not as strong. But just take a moment to lift our eyes and say, wow. Do they have a bridge to tomorrow? Is there something else I did not hear? Can I enter into and share that pain?
And also someone who might have more than you. But you don't know that their sibling died of cancer or that they have a child that's actually living under a bridge. So we all carry pain, and that's where we can then learn to empathize. There isn't just one side of any line that always is the receiver of the empathy, but we're all called to give and to receive.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why the political narrative is so divided, because usually when the sides try to make their argument, they do make it seem like, well, all the rich people are bad. Or all the poor people are bad.
Right.
All the black people are bad, or all the white people are bad, or all the people that cross the border are bad, and all of us who are native-born American are bad. I'm like, okay, native-born American. Okay, just stop right there. Someone has to be the bad guy.
Yeah.
And it's usually class wrong. And what's fun is flipping it. And I'll tell you, in some of our Dream Clock conversations, that aha moment where I do a hard shift out of the ethnic conversation to say, I want you to greet someone that doesn't look like you, say hi to someone you usually ignore. But then we also say, and all of you who were born in poverty, you struggle to look a wealthy person in the eye. Why do you ignore them? A lot of times we say poor is righteousness. You got more character because you have less money. Okay, but why are you so intimidated by them? And what I hear you saying is, we have an agreement around virtue. And what if there's an area where we could be caring for others too? Let me read this final quote. I think it'll help us just land this conversation really well. This is Dr. King's, his last two closing paragraphs to the letter from a Birmingham jail. If I have said anything in this letter that overstates the truth and indicates an unreasonable impatience, I beg you to forgive me. If I have said anything that understates the truth and indicates my having a patience that allows me to settle for anything less than brotherhood, I beg God to forgive me. I hope this letter finds you strong in the faith. I also hope that circumstances will soon make it possible for me to meet each of you, not as an integrationist or a civil rights leader, but as a fellow clergyman and a Christian brother. Let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away and the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from our fear-drenched communities, and in some not too distant tomorrow, the radiant stars of love and brotherhood will shine over our great nation with all their scintillating beauty. Yours for the cause of peace and brotherhood, Martin Luther King Jr. I want to invite everybody here to kind of make some quick closing thoughts, because I'm reading, if I've said anything in this letter that overstates the truth, indicates any unreasonable, forgive me, I want to have brotherhood. It's like, boy, I wonder what would happen if we had a law that at the end of every argument on the House and the Senate floor, you have to make this quote. Oh, yes. Come on, right wingers and left wingers. Let's learn how to walk together. What if you have to say 6 to 8 of these sentences in relevant terms.
Wow.
To have a right posture towards one another, because divided America is just going to hurt everybody. All right. Let's just prepare to close. Anybody want to wrap up this great set of episodes? Let's hear your thoughts.
Yeah, well, he says, in a not too distant future, I hope we're going to be friends. I mean, this is paraphrasing. In a not too distant future, I hope we're all going to love each other. And so he's setting up the dream. He's setting up hope. That's the narrative. Lament is connected to hope. I'm naming our pain with the hope that we can heal and move towards a future that's not you're kicked out so that we can be here. It's not you're now suffering so that we can thrive. It's that we are together as one.
Right.
We're talking about right now, we're preparing for the 60th year anniversary of the letter from Birmingham Jail. But in a few months, we're going to have another 60th year anniversary of the I Have a Dream speech, in which there's this peroration at the end of his speech, which was not in his notes, by the way, but he was, getting filled with the Holy Ghost, as we say. And Mahalia Jackson behind him yelled,
"That's right.
Tell him about the dream.
Tell him about the dream."
And then he starts saying these famous lines, I have a dream that my little children, we've been talking about our kids a lot.
That's right.
But that dreaming for the future puts my pain in a different narrative.
That's really good.
And I think thinking of that as a corporate activity, that's what we're trying to do, dream together. But I can tell you, in our church and in the city, several times we've done an activity where we've just tried to get people together. The more diverse, the better. Young and old and middle, all kinds of skin tones, people coming from poverty and wealth and everything in between, and just said, here's a piece of paper, here's some pencils or crayons or markers or whatever. Dream about what you would love for our city to be like.
Beautiful.
If God's love was everywhere in our city, what would it be like? Some people draw pictures, some people write words or phrases or a poem or a letter or whatever. And in those pictures, everybody's thriving.
That's great.
There's an educational ecosystem in which every kid can read and every kid knows they're loved and they're valued. There's empty jails. Let's tear those down and do something better. There's usually gardens and playgrounds and sports and picnics, and people are just dreaming together. And I think that work of like, okay, let's do the lament, let's name where our hurt, but then let's dream together. And then that allows us to roll up the sleeves.
That's beautiful.
And say, I want to be your friend. And let's work. I would love to get there in a not too distant future, but let's at least go that way so that our grandkids can be there.
Awesome.
I love it.
Lee, Scotia, that's just beautiful.
Ditto. It was beautiful.
That was beautiful. Yeah. I just want to express a gratitude both to you all and also just to Martin Luther King and the many, many people who have sacrificed to open the doors for us to have this conversation and for us to be able to dream. I don't know if you remember years ago, my husband and I and at Shiloh, we put on the Dream Together art and essay contest.
I didn't know about this. Okay.
That's
and
true.
So,
do we have to pay you royalties for this podcast?
No.
Look at
We're
that.
dreaming together.
That's right.
She's giving freely.
But we did what you said. We just asked our community, share the kids of our community, share your dreams. And we had prize money and all of that and a big celebration. And so even though this has been, this letter was written by a man in prison. I mean, he was in jail. And on the fourth day, I think you set us up.
That is what I said. I think it was accurate.
Confinement. But this was not like a party. But I feel like it is the price that is paid so that we can celebrate.
Yes.
Yep.
And we can celebrate small progress along the way, and we can celebrate bigger times. But that dream together, essay and art contest ended with those kids being able to have their artwork on display and the community gathering around to celebrate that. And so I just celebrate this. I celebrate us being able to come together from our many different backgrounds. And I celebrate the life of this man who he didn't just give up his comfort. He gave up his life so that this message could keep going forward. And it is going forward.
Yes, it is. Awesome. And that was beautiful. It was at a grocery store. Buy for Less with the Benkowskis. And that was a beautiful vision. Lee?
If I had to say anything, it was the humility that was demonstrated at the end of that letter while suffering.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I just think it's a huge example to us all. You talking about if this could be was required closing to congressional filibusters or whatever it is. I think it'd be beautiful if we could humble ourselves, no matter what the issue is, what the issue was. We could humble ourselves and say, if I'm wrong. And probably nothing bothers me more than to be in a discussion with someone and the only opinion I can have is theirs. And I try not to ever do that to anyone. That the only right answer could be my response. Whether or not we're talking about the Dallas Cowboys or we're talking about presidential election, there's so many facets to anything. And just showing humility and honoring another person. My dad, years ago, I wish you guys could have met him, late Dr. DeWitt Rowland was teaching our church on a book. Taught it all kinds of ways. I'm okay, you okay. And it's about transactional analysis. It wasn't I'm okay and you're not okay, or you're okay and I'm not okay. It's I'm okay and you're okay. And that book was, it's probably 100 years old now. I don't know. And why can't we do more of that right now? And he said it right there.
Now, Clarence, we just finished 4 episodes on the letter from a Birmingham jail, but would you say we're done dreaming together?
Oh, no.
Or our listeners?
we could go for so much longer. But the work starts with us, and part of the work, many of you have listened to all of this, and so we applaud you. And thank you for being a part of this Stronger Together family. Help us by spreading the word. Invite your friends to listen to the podcast. Stay in touch through strongertogether.global. Like, share, and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. And just know, tomorrow is not something that's out of reach. It's actually already started. We want to give credit to those who have gone before us. I think it's a horrible discrediting to say that we made no progress when people have just given up houses, resources, and all kinds of things to be peacemakers. Join us in being peacemakers. We'll catch you next time on our next episode.
That's right. Next episode. More coming soon. We're already brainstorming. We already got plans to invite you to come dream with us.
Hey, there's some things that we've got to talk about that might be a little bit touchy, but guess what? We're going to talk about it. You know, a friend gave me the best picture for dealing with an argument in marriage. He said, as long as while you're talking about the problem, you're not facing each other like this, you said, picture yourself walking side by side, going towards the same goal, discussing it together. And that's what we want to do together. Thank you for joining us on Dream Together.